All right, so my philosophy. This is going to be it was a big thought process, and it still continued to be a big process on what I want my philosophy of something that I'm not really sure I agree with and believe in to be. So, since I really had to think about, and I've had to look back on some of our readings and really think about which facets of EE that I want to take and that I think are useful. So, to start it off, the definition of EE, I think, first of all, it's a really big question to start with, because I don't really think that there is a way to actually truly define EE. I think that EE is, if done correctly, is an art. It's like asking an artist to truly give like a step-by-step process of what they do. No artist is going to be able to step back and be like, okay, step one, I took the brown paint and mixed it with the blue paint, but they can say, this is what comes out of my process. And I think who said it best was Estes, and they said experiential education is a process for the learners, and it can produce change within the individual. To me, that's what EE is. It's something that is a process for the learners, not for anyone else, and it can produce real change in the learner about that. And that change, I really think we talked about, comes through reflection, because I think a lot of times we'll have a process that we go through in a lot of classes or real life experiences, but if we never step back and take time to reflect on that, there's not really going to be any real change. So I think that is what EE is defined. It's really a process that's for the learners, and it can produce a change within them through that reflection piece. I think going beyond that is really, for each individual person, your explanation of EE and definition of EE is going to be really different than mine, because our processes are going to be different if we choose to do that. So I don't really know if you can define EE as much as you can talk about the tenets of it. And I guess too that it's going to be different for everyone if you agree with it. It's really difficult for me to define EE because I don't really know if I agree with it, but there are portions of it that I think I agree with. So I'm going back and talking about how this helps society as a whole or hinders society as a whole. That was difficult for me because I don't really think I've seen EE truly done effectively. We talked about this last night, but I don't really think that this class was an effective example of EE, because A, that's not my style as a leader, and B, because I don't think I was always led in EE, so I don't know how I was supposed to lead in EE. But I do think if it is done effectively, the things that I really took from it is that it can cultivate a passion for life that can be accomplished only through experience. And through those experiences, that passion and the new skills come, and I think that's something that EE probably would really add to a learning environment that if you took just straight out. Also, I think that it needs to be something, if it's going to be effective, that's a meaningful and challenging experience. I don't think true change can really come if there is no meaning for the learner, because then it's just something that they don't care about. So if it's not meaningful for the learner and it's not challenging for the learner, and that's where I think the most growth comes, is from when you have a challenge. So I think that true EE has to be meaningful and challenging, which is when they're added together, could be a rock star combination to really give that experience that we talked about with EE something that creates a lifelong change. And thinking back too about the value of EE, I think that it almost has as much danger as it does value, because I think if EE is done wrong, and we talked about this, is thrown off the cliff, then there is not going to be any value. Actually, it's going to be devalued. We were talking about, with my group, an active student involvement. This is Brunig said this: active student involvement in a meaningful and challenging experience and the development of new knowledge around the world. To me, my students really didn't get something that they found meaningful for some of them because they didn't feel like they were properly coached in the way that they should have been. So they walked away and they didn't develop a passion for life like we talked about through experience, how James talked about, because honestly, they developed something that was not a passion for event planning. They walked away with something that was almost a disdain for event planning because of some of the hoops that they had to go through that were not properly explained. Like we spoke about last night, the thing with accounts payable. They walked away with this great disdain because it was never explained to them why things were happening like this. And so I think EE has the power to cultivate that passion and a power to have active student involvement, but it also has, if done correctly, has the opposite effect. Could have something like an inactive student involvement in a meaningful and challenging experience. It can be challenging, but not meaningful, and I think that's kind of where EE treads really, really lightly. And it's going to be something that for each leader, they're going to have to manage that in their own style and way. So I think when we talk about explaining how experiential education contributes to improving quality of learning in life for your clients or your peers, I can only really think about my experience because that's the only experience I've ever had. So I had to think back on myself as a leader and think back on the way that I did it. And so in a way, this has kind of become my EE philosophy in that way. I don't think that my students maybe took away from EE what they needed to, because I have not taken away from EE what I think I needed to. I think what I might have, because I really don't think that my intellectual virtues and my moral virtues met up at the end. It talks about moral virtues must be developed in order that the intellectual virtues can be guided and controlled to their proper ends. I think that my moral virtues are very much in place, but my intellectual virtues about EE were not going in. So, of course, the things that I directly leaned on were my moral virtues because that's what I knew about and that's what I understood. And so I don't think that my moral virtues and my intellectual virtues have been on the same playing field. So I think that was something that in the end my group took away was my moral virtues, because that's the only thing I had a really clear understanding of. And I think that they learned a lot from my moral virtues and maybe not from my intellectual ones so much. And so I think that if you send out leaders of EE to go and do things and they haven't gotten those two things in line and you haven't prepared them to have those two things in line, that EE is not going to be as cooperative or as contributing as people want it to be, or as much as I think that this class wanted to be. I do think, and I do agree that EE can cultivate a passion for life that can only be accomplished through experience, but I don't think it has to be through EE that people can cultivate that passion. But I think that is a requirement for EE, and that's one of my requirements. So we're going to say an EE philosophy is really doing something that can create a passion for life and a passion for what they're doing, and something that they can walk away and say, you know what, I loved this and I hated this, but at the end of the day, I have this passion for it because now I fully understand, to all the realm of my understanding, what it means to be an event planner or what it means to be an outdoors person. And because I also think when Jablowski said the willingness of teachers to adapt their methods, content, and approaches to the context in which they are working and the ways in which their students are experiencing learning, I think that way can really contribute to the way that society as a whole kind of looks at learning, because I don't think that a lot of time teachers adapt their methods to what they're doing and the students who they're working for. I think actually that is one tenet of EE that I might have gotten right. I got to know my group enough that I knew what was going to work with each of them and what wasn't going to work. So I knew what I had to do with Betsy was going to be different from what I had to do with Emma or Maggie or Luke, because I got to know them and I had to adapt my methods with them and I had to adapt my approaches. So with Luke, maybe I could just say, hey, this isn't right, you can fix it. But with Emily, I might have had to coach her along more and sit next to her and sit side by side with her and say, hey, this is how we're going to write this email, or this is how we're going to do this. So I think that that is something that EE can do really effectively too, and that's another of my EE philosophies. So I think, long story short, that EE can improve the quality of learning if it's done efficiently, if those moral and intellectual virtues are lined up, if the teacher can adapt their methods, if a passion for life is cultivated. But I don't know if it was done that way in this class. And I'm not placing blame, because I'm placing some of the blame on myself because I don't think I did it efficiently and correctly. So I think if I had to say what my EE philosophy was, I don't think I would take all the tenets with me at all. But the ones that I've mentioned just so far, the ones that I really think stuck with me, or that I want anyone that I supervise to really have a shared sense of what we're doing, in the way that I'm your leader, but I'm going to be standing side by side with you, helping you through this entire thing. And I want it to always be towards an exciting goal, something that people can get passionate about and they understand why they're working. I always want to adapt my methods, my content, and my approaches based on who I'm working with. And I always want something that is going to be meaningful and challenging, because I think challenge is really how you grow. And finally, I think whatever job I get or wherever I go in my life, I'm going to have to find a way to have my moral virtues and my intellectual virtues lined up, because I don't think that I can really succeed with just one or the other. So that, in a way, is my EE philosophy. How I define EE, how the semester changed how I saw EE, and how helpful I think it will be in my future life. So thank you again, Mallory, for everything that you've done for me.